Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about the HOA that made the entrance to my property. I've been waiting for months to share this story, partly because I needed time to calm down, but mostly because I wanted every piece of evidence in order before revealing what really happened. You see, last fall I found out that my neighborhood's homeowners association secretly carved an entrance into my private mountain property without my consent. It was an audacious invasion, and I'm still stunned they had the nerve to do it. But let me back up a bit so you can appreciate the full scope of this situation, which was so bizarre I sometimes wonder if it was all just a wild fever dream. Yet, I have more than enough proof that it truly occurred. My name is Everett. I've always loved nature and valued quiet over city life. Since I was a kid, I wanted a mountain retreat to escape to on weekends or long vacations and enjoy the woods. My love for remote cabins began when my parents took me camping in the Highlands. The freedom I felt in the presence of towering evergreens, crisp mountain air, and birdsong was priceless. Thanks to a small inheritance from my grandfather, I bought a small mountain lot 7 years ago. The cabin was sturdy and needed only minor repairs. I added a guest room and a small workshop to the cabin over time. I kept a sturdy fence around most of the property because I stored tools and equipment outside. My generator and well-provided off-grid power and water. Despite living in the suburbs, that mountain cabin was my sanctuary. I started with just the cabin. The closest neighbor was nearly a mile away, and there was no homeowners association. However, a development project began building luxury cabins for glamping near my mountain area in recent years. Even though many of us were never consulted about joining, a new HOA took over all local properties. Since I'd owned my property for years before the HOA existed, I was sure I wasn't required to join. The HOA's leadership insisted that I was subject to their rules due to geographical adjacency, so I wasn't surprised when I got my first letter. As I read the polite but firm notice about landscape conformity and road maintenance fees, I blinked several times. It was absurd to pay for road maintenance on a private route I built to my cabin. They also required me to use a certain fencing and trim some natural brush. A manual they mailed me detailed it with pictures of perfectly manicured lawns and shrubs. This was my first glimpse of authoritarian and power-hungry HOAs. I shrugged and put the pamphlet in a drawer. I would tell them no thank you if they called me directly. But life got busy, and the following months were chaotic. I had family obligations and work travel. Nearly forgot about the HOA fiasco. I ignored their occasional letters, mostly gentle reminders to join. I think Clifton, the HOA president, got my phone number from a neighbor I told about the letters. Clifton left voicemails telling me to follow the association's rules or face serious consequences. He tried to sound official, saying joining the community up there would benefit me in many ways. Listening to these messages made me shake my head. First, my cabin was self-sufficient. My own path led to it, which I maintained. I never used their communal facilities and didn't want to pay for their architectural uniformity. Clifton caught me in person while I was checking the cabin in the mountains. A shiny SUV pulled up behind my truck as I collected firewood boughs. Clifton emerged in this expensive jacket with an imperious grin. He introduced himself by shaking my hand so tightly it felt like a command. He asked to see my property to discuss membership details, as if I had invited him. I politely declined, saying I wasn't interested. Clifton persisted that I was missing out on the benefits and should contribute to the collective. I left and locked my front door. Clifton probably watched my fence and property like a hawk outside. He shouted I'd regret ignoring the association. So I closed the curtains and waited until he drove away. It was unsettling, but I knew Clifton couldn't do much without the legal right. My plot was free and clear, and my deed had no HOA. A few weeks later, an official-looking letter arrived at my main residence, urging me to allocate at least one room for renting purposes under the auspices of the association. The reason was laughable. They wanted to list my cabin as a vacation spot for their members to rent during holidays and weekends. The letter said my place was sufficiently large, and I should do my part for the broader community by sharing space. I was confused, I was invaded, and the letter strongly implied that if I refused, they would punish me. According to my research, Clifton was running for re-election as HOA president and was trying to recruit new members or resources to show his success in expanding amenities. He probably saw my cabin as a rental draw because it was one of the nicest in that mountainous area. He could improve his standing with the HOA by showing that he convinced me and my property to conform. I refused and ignored the letter like the rest. Just then, I considered calling my attorney to officially warn them to stop. However, I was preoccupied with personal matters and thought staying silent would resolve the issue. One morning in the suburbs, my mountain neighbor Ezekiel called me. Ezekiel had a cabin near mine, but it was in the new development. He reluctantly joined the HOA because his deed mentioned it. He often complained about their rules, but he rarely went there, so it didn't bother him. However, he sounded upset that day. His security cameras caught suspicious activity near my land, he said. He saw a group of men wearing bright safety vests without company logos carrying tools and large plywood pieces. They approached the fence on my property's far side, obscured by thick underbrush. Ezekiel saw them drill into the fence and remove panels, but not everything. They then built a secret door or gate, shocked. They cut a hole in my fence, angry, I asked Ezekiel. He said yes, and he thought they were building a path to connect a new public trail to my land. I quickly put my clothes in a bag, got off the phone, and got in my truck for the 3-hour drive to the mountains. My mind raced the whole way. Who was doing this? Was it Clifton or the HOA at his request? Would they be stupid enough to trespass and damage property? I arrived at my cabin late that afternoon to find a resounding yes. My fence had a newly cut opening, partially hidden by branches and half-baked camouflage. No small hole either. They used thick hinges to create a secret entrance that could be missed from afar. I looked closer and saw that they had carefully measured the gap, sawed through the metal chain links and supporting post, and welded on a rectangular frame with an outside secured latch. They even added a chain and padlock to prevent me from opening it from my side. That nerve! My rage increased. Walking around my property, I checked for other tampering. Thank goodness only that fence section was vandalized, but that was enough. While I was away, the HOA created an access point into my private property, likely to brag about linking a new rental cabin to their common trails. No matter that I hadn't consented, they believed they were unstoppable. A terrifying realization. If someone will break into your land in broad daylight to achieve their goal, what else can they do? I went to Ezekiel's house the next day to view his camera footage. The recording showed 3 men, 2 older, 1 middle-aged, using power tools to approach my fence. A baseball cap and partially obscured vest with the association's name were worn. The footage also showed them hammering away, occasionally checking for onlookers. After testing and locking the door, they left in an unmarked white van. This took 2 hours, according to timestamps. Brazen confidence enraged me. I immediately called the sheriff. I told them someone had broken into my property and vandalized my fence. The deputy was sympathetic but cautious, saying they'd send an officer to inspect the damage. Another officer, Darius, arrived that day. Professional and polite, he took photos, examined the gate, and asked for evidence. I gave him Ezekiel's camera footage. Darius took notes and promised a formal report. I asked if they could press charges immediately, but he said they had to identify the perpetrators. I almost groaned as Ezekiel and I locked eyes. From the camera angle, the van's license plates were hard to read, but the men in the video were HOA members. Darius said the department would try to improve the footage and get a plate number. He advised me to hire a civil action attorney. I assured him I would. Now I realized this was more than fence repair. Creating an illegal entrance by the HOA could have led potential renters onto my property for tours or weekend getaways. I was furious that strangers could sneak onto my deck. I took a day off work and spent the morning at a local attorney's office. Meredith, the lawyer, was appalled by the evidence. She said trespassing, vandalism, and burglary were possible if I could prove they intended to enter the cabin illegally. She also warned that some HOAs are cunning, so we'd need to gather every scrap of evidence that I was never under their jurisdiction. Meredith planned to send a strong cease and desist letter immediately, followed by a lawsuit if they didn't comply. I was hesitant. Lawsuits are long and expensive, but I felt I had no choice. Their arrogance in damaging my property deserved a serious response. I wanted them to know I wouldn't surrender. A few days later, Clifton called. He was upset. Apparently, the sheriff's department informed him of an investigation. He said to drop this nonsense because it was all a misunderstanding. I asked him to explain how breaking my fence and installing a hidden gate was a misunderstanding. I nearly laughed out loud when Clifton claimed the fence line was on communal ground, and they were restoring an old path that had historically existed. My deed stated that the property boundaries extended to the fence and did not mention a historical path. He also tried to guilt me by saying the association was trying to increase tourism and that my cabin would benefit from better exposure. I told him my mountain property was not for rent, tours, or his re-election campaign. I slammed the phone, shaking with anger. Clifton persisted. The HOA's lawyer wrote that a portion of the fence may be on a community access easement. I was forbidden from destruction or removal of the gate. That nerve. After reading that letter, I marched outside and tore down the gate with my welder friend Luca. Concrete and steel brackets reinforced the post as we replaced it with new chain link. Every step was photographed, and Jill, my neighbor, watched the removal to confirm that I was just restoring my fence. I was ready to go to court if they did. That night, a friend in the suburbs near my home called me in a panic. He heard from mutual acquaintances that Clifton was causing neighborhood trouble by claiming I was destroying communal property and had legal rights to access. I realized it was out of control. If Clifton was spreading rumors, I had to clarify. I decided to go public then. I contacted the local community news bulletin that covers property disputes. I scheduled an interview and presented my evidence. Letters demanding I rent my place, fence vandalism video, and my attorney's cease and desist letter. Given the HOA's brazenness, the journalist was fascinated by the story. The intrusion was detailed in an article with Ezekiel security footage screenshots. The article proved the HOA was overstepping its authority, even though they changed my name for privacy. While all this was happening, I discovered another plot twist. My water line was tampered with. I have a well, but I also kept an external water reservoir full for emergencies, especially in dry seasons. The reservoir is downhill from the cabin near the fence. I checked and found that someone had shut off the well pump-to-reservoir valve, leaving it half full. It normally locks, but the lock was missing, like clipped. Was it random vandalism? Possibly. But it felt too coincidental. Someone probably tried to sabotage my water supply to force me to negotiate with the HOA. If the water reservoir was low or damaged, I might need outside help. Given what happened, the same people who broke my fence could have messed with the reservoir. I replaced the lock with a hardened steel one and installed a motion sensor camera in a nearby tree to cover the reservoir. I notified the sheriff again. Officer Darius returned, took more photos, and reminded me that he couldn't do much without proof linking it to the HOA or its affiliates. The vandalism report was updated with this new incident. Clifton insisted I was wrong despite this. One weekend, I drove up to check on the cabin and saw a new sign near my property's main road. Future site of scenic rental cabin, managed by the HOA. The arrogance took my breath away. I grabbed it and threw it into my truck. That evening, I saw Clifton sneaking around my property. He probably checked the new fence segment I installed. I confronted him with a flashlight and asked if he wanted to die by trespassing again. He smiled smugly and said, "This land will serve the community whether you like it or not." He left into the darkness. I considered following him but called the sheriff for safety. Clifton left before a patrol car arrived. My attorney Meredith dropped a bombshell around this time. She found an important detail in county property records. The HOA actively sought to rezone part of the mountains as a recreation district. This rezoning could help them claim easements around private land. The catch was that these new designations were unapproved. It was illegal to forcefully open my property entrance. The rezoning, still a big if, might cause a legal battle, but it didn't give them immediate access. With this information, Meredith filed an injunction to stop the HOA from building or altering my land. The judge issued a temporary restraining order against the association, barring them from entering or altering my property during the investigation. Great relief. Finally, I had legal protection to stop their harassment. Clifton was desperate. He needed big wins to win HOA president re-election. Some members of the association were unhappy with his direction, claiming he mismanaged funds or threw lavish parties with HOA money. He may have had one last chance to show that the HOA could expand and secure new rental properties at my cabin. It was rumored that Clifton would unveil a luxury cabin with direct trail access for short-term rentals to HOA members. Ezekiel, who overheard some chatter at a local cafe, told me that Clifton was promising influential association members free weekend stays at this luxury cabin to win their votes. Discuss shady politics. Clifton pulled one last trick before the re-election. He organized a mountain lodge preview on the communal trail next to my land, even though my fence was repaired. He must have expected to lead people through that illegal gate. Imagine his surprise when guests found the gate gone and a new reinforced fence in its place. He and a few confused onlookers realized they couldn't enter my property as I stared him down from my side of the fence with my arms crossed. Clifton tried to reassure the crowd that the legal dispute would be resolved soon and the gate would be reinstalled. Several attendees appeared uneasy and murmured about not wanting trouble. I politely informed them that my property was private and not open for tours when I called. I informed them of the vandalism and sheriff's investigation. After seeing the attendees whispering, Clifton paled, clearly disillusioned by the whole fiasco. No doubt his plans failed. Sheriff's investigators finished in a few weeks. By carefully analyzing the video, they confirmed the van's license plate. The HOA rented it with Clifton's permission. The older men in the video were Clifton's fence-building day laborers. When questioned, the laborers said they were installing a permit-approved gate. They were unaware of their vandalism. All signs pointed to Clifton as the main initiator. Clifton was charged with property damage and misdemeanor trespassing. While those charges seem minor, they tarnished his reputation. The local paper also reported that the HOA president was charged with a crime. Clifton's re-election campaign ended with this publicity. Many association members, fed up with his overreach and shady dealings, turned against him as word spread. On election day, Clifton was defeated for president. The new president promised to rebuild trust. I heard he tried to contact me to apologize or negotiate. Since I didn't want to join that HOA, I never responded. My attorney and I used all legal means to exclude my property from their domain. We submitted my original deed and a sworn affidavit proving I never signed a covenant with their community. The civil case judge granted me a permanent injunction against the HOA claiming my land. Clifton received more than a simple legal reprimand. High fines and fence repair restitution were his fate. I also discovered through public records that he had a previous financial mismanagement conviction, which explained his desperate attempt to cling to power. After his criminal history was revealed, the HOA shunned him. He left town soon after and his new SUV was repossessed, likely due to financial issues. The last rumor was that he moved out of state. I learned about property rights and boundary laws from this. I upgraded my cabin security. I upgraded my locks, installed trail cameras around the perimeter, and improved my relationship with my mountain neighbors. Ezekiel was a loyal ally who shared crucial camera footage. It may have been too late to find the secret gate without his call. I have extra credibility because Jill witnessed me taking the gate down. I also learned how stubborn and brazen some people can be when they think they can push you around. Standing up for my rights wasn't selfish. It established that private property is not fair game, no matter how ambitious or manipulative a HOA. My fellow mountain cabin owners thanked me for resisting. One even considered selling because the HOA was pressuring him to retrofit his home to their design standards. After my story made the local news and Clifton was voted out, the association seemed to tire of these strong-arm tactics. After that, the mountain property became the peaceful retreat I wanted. Stop Clifton's surprise visits. No more fine letters or space rental demands. Reshingling the roof, updating the insulation, and expanding my workshop were my summer projects. I can finally enjoy the property without worrying about the HOA demanding my building permits or complaining that my fence doesn't meet community guidelines. I still remember finding that hidden gate. The sense of violation and disbelief was deep. I felt unsafe knowing they trespassed easily, but vulnerability became resolve. Protecting my legal rights was necessary. I did that with legal help and watchful neighbors. And I hope my experience can warn anyone who thinks a HOA or similar organization can force their will on a property owner without a valid claim. One particularly striking subplot is the sabotage of my water reservoir. I never found direct proof linking that to Clifton or his cronies, but the timing seems suspicious. If that sabotage was intentional, it shows their willingness to go far. Cutting off someone's water to force them to comply with your bizarre demands is inexcusable. I consider it morally indefensible. I didn't like the situation, even though the sheriff's department couldn't blame Clifton. A smaller note about my workshop. I made rocking chairs, Adirondack chairs, and small tables for friends and family as a hobby. Clifton casually mentioned that the HOA would love to feature my work in a community art festival if I joined officially and played by the rules. I politely declined. But looking back, he was trying to get me to join so I'd be more receptive. I realized that unscrupulous leadership can leverage good craftsmanship or unique contributions in these associations. Unfortunately, a community-building organization can become a platform for power struggles. A subplot alleged that Clifton bribed local officials to speed up the rezoning process with association funds. A neighbor told me a city official was at one of Clifton's parties, spurring rumors of a secret deal. I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but it shows the community's culture of deals, backroom promises, and unscrupulous tactics. After the new HOA president took over and Clifton was fired, these underhanded tactics seemed to stop. My opinion is that Clifton's worst punishment wasn't the fines or the charge. The humiliation and credibility loss were public. He lost his job, reputation, and possibly income. Additionally, his exposure in the local press likely made him a local outcast. I hope he learned that arrogance and deceit have consequences. Zero tolerance has been my legal policy since then. I attend local government zoning meetings and have informed the new HOA leadership that any attempt to infringe on my property will result in legal action. So far, they've literally followed the rules. Stop sending letters, posting signs, and installing unauthorized gates. I occasionally run into HOA members at the grocery store or cafe near the mountain base. They nod politely or pretend not to see me. Some apologize to me for the disaster. They say they never supported Clifton's strong-arm tactics but didn't know how to resist. I understand groupthink's power. I hope they realize there are ways to speak up or vote someone out before it escalates to illegal trespassing and property damage. Despite the stress, I found some joy. My relationship with Ezekiel improved. We became close friends over our HOA frustration. He planned to sell his cabin, but seeing me stand my ground convinced him to wait and see if the new president could be more reasonable. Ezekiel installed higher-resolution cameras, and we shared property security tips. For fun, we put a small sign at his driveway entrance that read, "You are on camera, smile for the mountain watch." That humor relieved the tension after all the drama. My workshop allowed me to improve my woodworking. The whole fiasco reminded me to keep pursuing my passions. Behind the cabin, I built a large picnic table with a stunning valley view. I sometimes sit out there with my morning coffee, reflecting on how close I came to losing control of this precious retreat. Conflict was stressful, but it made me appreciate the land more. I considered listing my cabin for short-term rentals on my own before this started. I quickly abandoned that idea after realizing the HOA sniffing around could cause chaos. I don't want strangers in my getaway. I respect vacation home renters, but my mountain cabin is a refuge, not a business. After everything that happened, I'll never let a HOA near it. I understand that HOAs can collect snow removal fees, maintain shared roads, etc. However, overreach can turn them into a private bureaucracy with little accountability. My story should show the dangers of letting a group like that operate unchecked, especially when led by a power-hungry Clifton. The county postponed the broad rezoning proposals after the fiasco. They halted them for more review and community input. A small victory, but it keeps my property peaceful, private, and under my control. If the county revisits the idea, I'll attend public hearings and speak out. I hosted a small gathering at my cabin at the end of that turbulent year. To celebrate the HOA-free property, I invited a few close friends, including Ezekiel. We grilled, told stories, and toasted marshmallows under a starry sky. We joked that Clifton might be watching from the bushes, but I never saw him again after he lost the presidency. The sheriff's department said to call them immediately if he trespassed again. He probably had more pressing issues than haunting my perimeter. My attorney Meredith visited. I can't thank her enough for defending my rights. She revealed her case-wide fascination at the party. "I've handled a lot of property disputes," she said, "but this was one of the most brazen attempts at land grabbing I've ever seen." I agreed wholeheartedly. Reality can be stranger than fiction. I studied property law, easements, and HOAs in the months that followed. Regulations and local ordinances are confusing. I gained respect for lawyers who navigate these murky waters. I also discreetly advised a few cabin owners who contacted me after reading the newspaper story. I'm not a lawyer, but I can share my experience and point them to resources. Some of those people had minor issues like the HOA complaining about their shutter color or driveway design. Some had more serious issues, like unauthorized common area expansions that threatened private property. They often let the HOA have its way to keep the peace. After seeing me resist, some put their foot down. How one case can inspire others to demand fairness is remarkable. The most important lesson from this ordeal is that property rights require vigilance. If Clifton and the HOA had installed that secret entrance, it could have led to more intrusions. If I opened the cabin to guests, they might have claimed partial ownership or demanded a share of rental income. What else could they have tried? Once you give entitlement-driven people an inch, they take a mile. The value of neighbors is another lesson. Without Ezekiel's warning, I may not have found the fence hole until it was too late. Jill's testimony was crucial. Modern society often talks about community breakdown, but sometimes good people stand up for what's right. Thank goodness I wasn't alone. Clifton's punishment was proportional to his law-breaking. The fines and criminal charges may seem like a slap, but his reputation was damaged. He was fired, paid legal fees, and likely has a permanent record for trespassing and property damage. That alone sends a message to HOA members considering such stunts. I still drive to the cabin every 2 weeks, even for an afternoon. I'll walk the perimeter, check the cameras, and make sure everything is okay before relaxing in nature for a few hours. No new incidents have occurred since the big confrontation a year ago. My water reservoir lock is intact, and no suspicious footprints have been found near the fence. I think the new HOA leadership no longer thinks they can control my property. After the new president took office, they sent me a formal apology letter saying they were taking steps to ensure no such misunderstandings occur in the future. I filed it with the rest of the documents. It may become interesting memorabilia, showing how far a HOA can go with an unscrupulous leader. This drama comes back occasionally, especially when someone asks about my cabin or if I had HOA issues. I usually laugh lightly and say, "Oh, you have no idea," before recounting the fence fiasco in brief. People are usually shocked. They say, "They broke into your property? How could they think that's legal?" I shrug. Power-hungry people think they can bully others into compliance. You can defend yourself if you follow the law and stay calm while gathering evidence. Friends, thank you. See you soon.